Welcome to Family Drama Stories from Reddit. Real family drama told from the heart. Let's begin. It started with a letter, one I was never meant to read. A single envelope slipped into the wrong mailbox, unraveled everything I thought I knew about my family. Secrets buried for decades clawed their way to the surface, threatening to shatter the fragile peace I'd spent years building. I never imagined a quiet Sunday morning could become the turning point that forced me to choose between truth and loyalty. My name is Martha. I'm 58, divorced, and Sanand, a small-town librarian who thought her life had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm. That is, until the day I opened someone else's mail. Not on purpose. I'm not nosy by nature. But the mail carrier had been training someone new, and a letter addressed to a C. Wright ended up in my box instead of my neighbour Clara's. I nearly tossed it back into the outgoing bin, but something stopped me. The return address was from a law firm in Atlanta, Wright, Halloway and Finch. It struck me as odd. Clara was a retired nurse, a widow for over a decade. She mostly kept to herself and her garden. But curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to walk it over to her porch myself. Clara didn't answer the door, which wasn't unusual, but as I slipped the envelope through her mail slot, I caught sight of her through the window, sitting stiffly in her living room chair, staring at the fireplace. Her face was pale. The envelope lay on the floor at her feet. She must have already received her own copy. I hesitated, then knocked softly. When she finally opened the door, her eyes were rimmed with red. She looked at me and simply asked, "Did you get one too?" "One what?" Her hand shook as she picked the envelope off the floor and held it out toward me. "A letter from my husband's lawyer. After all these years. He left something behind." That's when it hit me. Clara's late husband, Thomas, had been a real estate developer. Quiet man, a bit distant. I hadn't known much about him other than the fact he passed away from a heart attack while travelling for business 21 years ago. Clara had always spoken of him with a kind of fragile reverence, like someone holding onto a good memory with trembling fingers. "I think I need to sit down," I murmured. She nodded and let me in. We sat silently for a moment, the envelope between us like some kind of cursed artifact. Then she broke the seal and read. Her lips quivered as she whispered the words out loud. It was a confession. Thomas had fathered a child while on a trip to Savannah, just a few years before he died. The mother, a woman named Yvette Morales, had never contacted Clara or tried to claim anything. But Thomas had, quietly and without fanfare, arranged for a trust to be established for the child, and that trust was now seeking legal fulfillment. Apparently, their son, her stepson, was turning 21, and the firm had been instructed to inform all known family members. Clara looked like the wind had been knocked out of her. A child? After all these years? I didn't know what to say. I reached out to hold her hand and she gripped mine like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. A few days later, the second shock arrived. It wasn't Clara who received the next letter. It was me. My full name, my address, my date of birth, all typed neatly on thick cream paper. I didn't understand. I wasn't related to Thomas Wright. I'd never even met the man. But the letter said otherwise. There, in black and white, was a DNA report, a copy of a will, and a notarized letter from Thomas himself. I wasn't just someone who got a neighbour's mail by mistake. According to everything in that envelope, I was the child Yvette Morales had given birth to in Savannah. The one Thomas had set up a trust for. Me. I sat on my porch swing for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. I'd grown up believing my father had died in a construction accident when I was a toddler. My mother, God rest her soul, never remarried. She worked 2 jobs, barely made ends meet, and never once hinted that my father had been anyone other than the man in the faded photo she kept by her bedside. The betrayal hit me like a truck. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the life I thought I knew, the foundation I stood on, suddenly splitting apart beneath my feet. And somewhere inside, I felt a question rise that I wasn't ready to face. If I was Thomas Wright's daughter, what else had my mother kept from me? I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept turning over every memory I had of my mother, every bedtime story, every silent dinner, every late night shift she took when I was in high school. I never once doubted her. Not once. And now, I had a notarized letter in my hand that said the man who raised her eyebrows in every photograph I found tucked in drawers wasn't my father at all. The next morning, I did what I hadn't done in years. I drove 2 hours to visit my Aunt Lillian, my mum's older sister. She was 76 now, slower to stand and more delicate in the face than I remembered, but her eyes, sharp as ever, narrowed the moment I walked in with that manila envelope. I didn't even have to say anything. "You got it, didn't you?" she said as she stirred a spoonful of instant coffee. "You knew," I whispered. "You've always known." Lillian sighed and sat down across from me. "Your mama made me promise never to tell. She wanted to protect you. And honestly, back then it made sense." I unfolded the letter and slid it toward her. "Protect me from what?" She looked down at Thomas's name, at the neat signatures and official seals. "From him, from that whole life. He wasn't a bad man, not exactly, but he was married. Your mama didn't want to break up a home. She didn't want you growing up with half-truths and expectations that never belonged to you. She let me believe my father was someone who died in a construction accident," I said bitterly. Lillian's face softened. "Because it was easier to believe in a hero who died too soon than a man who didn't stay. And your mama, Lord love her, she didn't want you to ever feel like someone's second choice." I sat back, absorbing her words. I didn't even realize I was crying until she handed me a tissue. Everything I thought I understood was crumbling in slow motion. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hug my mother and ask her why. I wanted to hate her and forgive her all at once. "I'm his daughter," I said quietly. "You are?" she replied. "But you're also your mother's daughter. And she raised you with grit and grace, Martha. Don't forget that." The next few days blurred by in a mix of emotions and paperwork. The law firm sent another package, a portfolio detailing the trust Thomas had set up in my name. It was substantial. More than enough to pay off my mortgage, retire early, and still have plenty to leave to my own children if I'd had any. But more than the money, there was a letter. A real one, written in ink, signed in a man-slanted cursive I'd never seen before. "Martha, if you're reading this, then life has run its course, and I wasn't brave enough to do the right thing while I had the chance. You were never a mistake. Your mother was strong and kind and fierce, and I failed both of you by not being there. I watched from afar, sent what I could, but I know that doesn't make up for my absence. This trust can't undo the past, but I hope it opens a door to something better. Not money, not property, maybe peace, maybe understanding. Forgive me, if you can. Thomas Wright." I read it 3 times before folding it back into its envelope and setting it in my nightstand drawer. Peace, understanding. Words that sounded so simple but felt impossibly far away. 2 weeks later, I received another visitor, Clara. She stood on my porch in her wide-brimmed gardening hat, holding a bouquet of zinnias from her front yard. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. I nodded, wordless, and led her to the kitchen. She didn't waste time. "I've spoken with the lawyer. They confirmed everything. You are the beneficiary." "I never asked for it," I said quickly. "I didn't even know." She raised a hand. "I'm not here to fight you, Martha. I've been angry, yes, hurt, but I'm also not blind. You had nothing to do with what Thomas did." I exhaled, shoulders slumping. She continued, "That house down by the lake. He bought it for the 2 of you. It's been in the trust ever since. It's yours now." I looked at her, stunned. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara smiled faintly. "Because I realised something. That house never felt like home to me. But maybe it will to you." She stood up and handed me the flowers. We may not be sisters, Martha, but we're tied now, whether we like it or not. Let's not let the past ruin what's left of our futures." And with that, she walked out the door, leaving behind a vase of flowers and a strange flicker of hope I hadn't expected to feel again. The house by the lake sat on a stretch of land so quiet you could hear the breeze flirt with the trees before you even stepped out of the car. I hadn't been there since I was a child, and even then I thought it belonged to someone else, one of my mother's old friends or a distant cousin. I never realised that house had always been meant for me. Thomas had bought it 30 years ago under a shell company, a place, according to the documents, for Martha to one day find peace. It was modest, 2 stories, cedar shingles faded by the sun, a wraparound porch that looked out onto the still water. But something about it felt personal, like a secret waiting to be forgiven. I stood on that porch for a long time, key in hand, before finally pushing the door open. Dust danced in the light that poured through the front windows. The place had been cleaned recently, likely arranged by the attorney, but it still held the quiet of a house that had been waiting for someone to return, or perhaps to arrive for the first time. Inside, I found framed photographs I didn't recognise. One of a woman I didn't know, smiling by a canoe. Another of a much younger Thomas, holding a baby with strawberry blonde hair. I stared at that photo for a long while, trying to decide if the child was me. I couldn't remember that day, but my heart recognised something my mind didn't. Upstairs, the bedroom window looked out over the water, and I stood there as the sky turned pink. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't angry. I wasn't confused. I wasn't sad. I was still. That weekend, I invited Aunt Lillian to see the place. She stepped inside with a cane in one hand and a tin of oatmeal cookies in the other. "Looks just like it did when he first brought me here," she said, her voice catching. "He brought you here?" I asked. "Oh yes," she nodded, sitting slowly on the old leather sofa. "He asked me what kind of books you liked, said he wanted to start filling the shelves before you were old enough to read them." I swallowed hard. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" She gave me a tired smile. "Because, sweetheart, I was trying to protect you too. We all were. We just didn't realise we were protecting you from something you had a right to know." I sat beside her, both of us staring at the fireplace that hadn't been lit in years. "He tried, didn't he?" Lillian reached over and squeezed my hand. "Yes, in his way he did." The next few weeks blurred into something close to peace. I took time off from the hospital and stayed at the lake house, clearing out closets, restoring what I could. The work gave me purpose, and the quiet gave me space to think. I was alone, but not lonely. My mother still hadn't called. I'd expected her to, but the silence from her end grew louder every day. Part of me wondered if she was angry. Another part wondered if she was just ashamed. Then, late one afternoon, a small envelope arrived. No return address, just my name written in the handwriting I knew better than my own. Inside was a letter. "Martha, I suppose I always knew this day would come, and I feared it, or do I fear, more than I ever feared anything. I'm not good at apologies, but I need to try. I lied to you not out of malice, but out of fear that you'd see me differently, fear that you'd want someone else to be your mother, that you'd choose him over me. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to tell you the truth. I see now, that was my failing, not yours. I've spent your whole life trying to be enough. I only hope you'll understand that everything I did because I loved you. If you never write back, I'll understand, but if you do, I'll be waiting." Mum, I read it 3 times before folding it back and placing it beside Thomas's letter in the nightstand. Then, I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and stared out at the water until the stars came out. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive, but I did know I wasn't ready to close the door completely. The following morning, the air was crisp and filled with the scent of pine and earth after a light rain. I wrapped my hands around a steaming mug of coffee and sat out on the porch, rereading my mother's letter in my mind. I'd slept with it under my pillow, as though it might soften the ache in my chest. I didn't reply to her immediately. Something in me needed more time, not to process just her words, but the years behind them. The decisions, the secrets, the silence. Instead, I threw myself into restoring the lake house. I painted the walls in the soft yellow Thomas had used in the nursery photos. I cleaned out the old attic, discovering journals and notebooks with sketches of house plans, business ideas, and scribbled phrases that seemed to be half poems and half wishes. They were his. I felt him in every line. It became clear to me that Thomas had always intended this place to be my refuge, a space where I could come home to myself, and maybe, just maybe, that's what it had become. One afternoon, I drove into town for supplies and ran into Henry Walters, a retired carpenter who used to work with Thomas in his later years. He looked surprised when he saw me. "Martha, little Martha!" His weathered face lit up like dawn. I smiled. "It's been a long time. I'll say, last time I saw you, you were barely out of pigtails, following Thomas around with a book in one hand and a stick in the other." We laughed. I hadn't remembered that detail, but it sounded like something I would have done. I told him I was fixing up the house, and without asking, he insisted on helping. The next day, he showed up with his toolbox and a bag of tomatoes from his garden. "You don't have to pay me a dime," he said. "This house was his dream for you. I think it's only right I help you see it through." In the weeks that followed, Henry became a fixture at the lake house. He repaired the porch swing, replaced the broken gutter, and even built a small bookshelf under the stairs, just like one Thomas had drawn in his notes. It was simple work, but it connected us to something larger than either of us could explain. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we just sit in the silence, watching the water change colours with the sky. Then, one evening, a car pulled into the driveway. I stood at the window and watched as my mother stepped out, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a small tin. She looked older than I remembered, not just aged, weathered, as though regret had worn her down more than time ever could. She didn't knock. She stood at the edge of the porch as if waiting for permission. I opened the screen door, but said nothing. She offered the tin. "Cookies, oatmeal, like your father liked." I nodded slowly and took it from her hands. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't sure either," I replied. We stood in the quiet for a long moment. "May I sit?" she asked. I gestured to the porch swing. She sat stiffly, like she didn't quite know what to do with herself. "I drove past here once or twice," she said after a while, "before it was yours. I never knew he kept it for you." I didn't reply. I wasn't sure what to say. "I was afraid," she continued, "afraid that if you knew he wanted you in his life, you'd leave me. I couldn't stand the thought." "You didn't trust me," I said. She swallowed hard. "No, I didn't." And that in its own small way was an admission, an apology. I blamed him for leaving, for not fighting harder, for not making me fight harder. But the truth is, he always loved you. He just didn't know how to do it with me in the way. A breeze rolled through the trees. I stared out at the lake. "I am not here to fix everything," she added. I wanted to see the place, to see you." We sat together on that swing for nearly an hour, saying little. Sometimes English is the only language two hurt people can speak. When she stood to leave, she looked at me with eyes full of something I hadn't seen since childhood. Hope. "I'll go," she said, "but I hope one day you'll let me come back." I didn't answer. I didn't need to, not yet. She walked away, and I watched the car disappear down the gravel road, the dust lifting in the last light of day. Fall settled gently on the lake. The leaves turned the colour of fire, amber, crimson, gold, and for the first time in years, I found myself waking up without a heavy heart. The house, once a dusty memory, was now alive. The porch swing creaked with purpose. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon in the mornings. and the bookshelf under the stairs held stories that made me feel seen. I had created a rhythm. Mornings were for walking along the waterline with a cup of coffee, afternoons for painting or reading, and evenings for writing. I didn't know what I was writing exactly. Letters, maybe. Reflections, memories stitched together like a quilt I never had the courage to sew. I hadn't spoken to my mother since that afternoon on the porch, but I hadn't shut the door either. A week after her visit, I found a note tucked into my mailbox. No return address, no signature, just the handwriting I'd memorized as a child. It read, "One step at a time, I'll be here." It was the first time in my life I felt like she was walking towards me instead of away. I didn't respond, but I kept the note. As Thanksgiving approached, I debated whether to visit family. The invitations had come. My cousin Eleanor had even called twice. "You're not getting any younger, Martha," she teased. "Neither are we. Come, eat pie and be loved for once." I laughed, but I said no. Not this year. I needed to protect what I had built. The quiet, the healing, the small but fierce peace I had carved out of this place. Then, on the first Sunday of December, I heard a knock. It wasn't my mother. It was my sister, June. I hadn't seen her in nearly 7 years. She looked so much like our father, it made my breath catch. Same jawline, same quiet strength behind the eyes. She carried a casserole dish wrapped in a blue checkered towel. "I heard through the grapevine you were nesting," she said with a crooked smile. "I thought I'd come to see if you'd let a stray sibling in for lunch." I opened the door. We sat by the fireplace, eating in silence at first. Then the stories started to come. Not just the ones about our childhood, the good and the bad, but the things we had never told each other. She told me about her divorce, about how she'd spent the last few years caring for our aunt until she passed. She cried when she said she still missed Dad every day. "I always thought you were lucky," she said softly. "He gave you the better pieces of himself. He gave me the walls." I reached out and held her hand. "He gave us what he could," I said. "We just took different parts." June stayed the weekend. We played cards, laughed like we hadn't in decades. She helped me string up lights along the porch, and we hung a little wooden angel ornament from one of the pine trees in the front yard, a quiet tribute to Thomas. When she left, I felt a twinge of something I hadn't felt in years: belonging. The next morning, a letter arrived. This one was from my mother. She had written it by hand, several pages long. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She told the truth. About her fears, about her father's cruelty, about how she learned to survive by controlling everything around her. "I know I broke us," she wrote, "but I want you to know I never stopped loving you. I just didn't know how to show it in a way that didn't come from pain." It wasn't a perfect letter, but it was honest. I folded it carefully, tucked it into a drawer, and sat for a long while watching the lake. Maybe some things don't need to be fixed. Maybe some things just need to be seen. By Christmas, I sent her a small box. Inside was a single snow globe, the kind she used to collect before things got difficult. Inside was a miniature version of a lake house with tiny pine trees and a painted red door. No note, just the gesture. She wrote back, "You left the light on. I see it." Winter passed, and with spring came something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope not tied to regret, but to possibility. I wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house months ago with a broken heart and a head full of questions. I was Martha, daughter of Thomas and Marianne, sister to June, owner of a quiet lake house and keeper of her own peace. And for the first time, I believed I was enough. Life has a way of revealing who we are when everything else falls away, when the noise fades and all that's left is silence, reflection, and choice. Martha's story reminds us that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's found in stillness, in a handwritten note, or a quiet evening spent with someone who remembers your childhood laugh. We cannot rewrite our past, but we can choose how we carry it forward and who we allow into our future. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and peace doesn't require permission. Martha's journey shows that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's courageous. And while not every relationship is meant to be repaired, sometimes people surprise us. Growth, both ours and theirs, can blossom in unexpected ways. Have you ever walked away from someone you loved to protect your peace? Or had to rediscover who you are without the weight of others' expectations? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more real family stories told from the heart. You're not alone, and your story matters too.